The air in the server room was always exactly 68 degrees, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive failure. To everyone else, it was just the closet where the blinking lights lived. To me, Lena, it was the control center. For 3 months, I was the only intern in the entire R&D department. They called me the data janitor. The nickname wasn't mean, it was dismissive. The other 22 interns were the innovators, the visionaries, the ones the VP, Miles Holloway, took out for $300 dinners while I was eating microwave soup at my desk, meticulously auditing the legacy codebase. They were focused on the $400 million Phoenix project, the AI core that was supposed to revolutionize global supply chain logistics. I wasn't invited to those meetings. I was too busy keeping the engine from falling out. Miles Holloway, the VP of R&D, was minted, not made. He had that smooth, frictionless charisma that only comes from knowing you'll never face real consequences. His office was glass, overlooking the city, a literal ivory tower. He called everyone under 30 Sparky and measured productivity by vibe checks. He saw me as a temporary, silent utility, a necessary evil for cleaning up the digital debris the real geniuses left behind. He didn't know that the digital debris was the infrastructure. The day everything changed started with a celebration. Miles was throwing a pre-launch triumphal party for the Phoenix project. Champagne corks popped in the atrium. Miles stood on a custom-built, shimmering stage, backlit like a tech god. He pointed out the core team, the 22 visionaries, who basked in the spotlight. He didn't mention me. He didn't need to. I was just Lena, the data janitor, running the final quality control check from the server room basement. That's when I found the flaw. It wasn't a bug, it was an oversight. The Phoenix project was built on a brilliant open-source AI architecture. The team, pressed for time and driven by Miles's arbitrary deadlines, had used a pre-validated module for the data authentication layer. It was industry standard, clean and fast. The problem was the licensing. I had spent my 3 months not writing new code, but entangling the 11 years of legal and compliance knots that the company, Logicor, had accumulated. I knew every contract, every vendor agreement, every obscure federal filing better than Miles knew the name of his own assistant. My job wasn't glamorous. It was the boring, necessary work, the kind of work arrogant executives intentionally ignore. The specific line of code in the data authentication module was a single, tiny instruction: call third-party auth, open API key. It was clean, it was efficient, and it was tied to a very specific 5-year, non-transferable commercial use license with a company called Aegis Solutions, a license that expired in 17 days. Miles had budgeted $400 million for the Phoenix project's global launch. His entire business plan, his promotion, his whole ego rested on this launch. The license renewal fee was $50,000, a rounding error. But because the project had been designated internal R&D until launch, Miles had never filed the paperwork, never created the budget line, and never, ever spoken to compliance. In his mind, it was his code. I walked the 30 feet up to the celebration. The room smelled of success and expensive booze. I found Miles holding court with the CEO, his smile wider than the company's financial risk. I waited for a lull, which never came. So I just stood there, holding my laminated access badge, the one that got me into the boiler rooms, the same one that held my root-level credentials. "Miles," I said, my voice quiet against the buzz. He glanced at me, annoyed. "Sparky, aren't you supposed to be in the basement?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Everyone, this is an intern. She helps clean up." I stated, ignoring the insult. I found a problem in the Phoenix project's authentication layer. The Aegis Solutions commercial use license for the call third-party auth module expires in 17 days. It was never filed for renewal. The CEO paused, a flute of champagne halfway to his lips. Miles laughed, a loud, patronizing sound. "Lena, darling," he drawled, adjusting his silk tie, We're talking about a $400 million world-changing AI. We don't worry about 50 grand in paperwork. That's what HR is for. Go back to your basement. He gave me a fake teeth-clenched smile. Or better yet, get a drink and enjoy the show. You're dismissed. I walked back to the server room, but I didn't go home. I sat down at the terminal, the keyboard familiar under my fingers. Miles had ridiculed Lena. The response had to be surgical, non-criminal, and utterly devastating. I wasn't going to ruin the code. I was going to let the code ruin them. I pulled up the central repository, navigated to the core Phoenix project code, and isolated the offending file. The thought crossed my mind. I could just renew the license myself. I had the admin credentials. I could save the company, prove my worth, and wait for my promotion. But Miles hadn't just insulted my work. He had insulted the integrity of the infrastructure. He thought compliance was gum. He thought I was a janitor. My revenge would be silent. It would be an elegant, logical proof of his failure. I opened the code editor. Instead of deleting the line, which would flag an error and force an immediate fix, I did something far more subtle. I added a single, innocuous function call just above the Aegis authentication line. It was a placeholder function, commonly used in R&D to simulate future updates. It was named if_license expired fallback to local host. The function was empty. It did nothing. It was technically clean code, ready for future development. No compiler would flag it, no peer review would question it. It was simply a comment of intent hidden inside a function. Miles's automated testing suite, designed to check functionality, would see that the call third-party offline was still intact, still working, and still passing all tests. But the moment the Aegis license expired in 17 days, the server would hit the if license expired function first. It would pause, see an empty function body, and silently fail to execute the next line, the crucial authentication call. The $400 million project wouldn't crash. It would just authenticate nothing. It would become a beautiful, expensive husk of code, unable to talk to a single external client database. A global supply chain AI that couldn't confirm a single item's location. It was the quiet equivalent of pulling the plug, not the visible, flashy power cord, but the hidden, labeled wrong emergency power switch. I committed the change to the repository. I logged out, grabbed my backpack, and walked past the celebration. Miles was still on stage, talking about how he was disrupting the future. I knew better. He was disrupting himself. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. I had 17 days. The next morning, I handed my badge to the board's security guard. I smiled, feeling the lightness of a burden lifted, and drove away from Logicor. My phone was already buzzing. It was an email from my university's career services. They had forwarded my resume to a new, exciting startup specializing in compliance infrastructure for AI. My first interview was scheduled for day 3. Day 5, I was sitting in a high-backed leather chair, not across from a VP who called me Sparky, but across from the CEO of Titan Global, a massive infrastructure conglomerate. His name was Mr. Chen, and he wasn't interested in my university degree. He was interested in my knowledge of legacy compliance vectors. You were listed as the tertiary custodian on Logicor's Q3 infrastructure filing, Mr. Chen stated, his tone flat and professional. How did you achieve that clearance as a 3-month intern? I didn't boast. I just recounted the boring truth. Miles needed someone to verify the security protocols for the old network closet so they could convert it to a VR testing lab. I was the only person who read the full liability waiver required by the Municipal Fire Code. The waiver included a mandatory custodial signatory for access to critical network hardware per federal standards for fire suppression interface. Mr. Chen didn't smile, but his eyes lit up. You didn't just read the waiver, you understood the leveraged liability it created. I corrected him. Miles saw a closet. I saw the network kill switch, mandated by law. I signed as a placeholder. Miles forgot to update the filing when the lab opened. My interview was a masterclass in proving that the boring stuff is the real power. I wasn't selling coding skills, I was selling institutional memory and regulatory immunity. I walked out with an offer for an infrastructure consultant role that paid 3 times what the other visionary interns were hoping for. I had transitioned from a data janitor to a compliance architect. Meanwhile, back at Logicor, the first tremor began. Day 9. Miles was in a frenzy trying to prepare the Phoenix project for its final investor showcase. The team was running stress tests. The AI core was performing beautifully, solving complex supply chain issues in milliseconds. Everything looked perfect. The problem wasn't the code, it was the external data feed validation. A major vendor, Apex Logistics, needed to integrate their system with Phoenix for a demo. Apex's lead compliance officer, Ms. Vasquez, sent an email requesting Logicor's current external system root certificate. Miles's team, not knowing what a root certificate was, forwarded the email to Bryce, Miles's new, unqualified replacement for the previous IT director, who would quit over Miles's management style. Bryce attempted to generate a new certificate through the old administrative console. The console, designed by the previous IT team, had a built-in security failsafe. It recognized that the user attempting the root certificate action was not the registered custodial signatory, nor was it the registered tertiary custodian, Lena. Instead of crashing, the system did something subtle and devastating. It entered a provisional verification loop, meaning the console appeared to be working, generating certificates, but every certificate it issued was automatically flagged as pending review and untrustworthy by any external system designed for high-security transactions. Apex Logistics system, receiving the untrustworthy certificate, immediately rejected the connection and sent a brief bureaucratic email. Connection refused. Incompatible certification authority chain. Miles, seeing the refusal, barked at Bryce. "Fix the internet! Their firewalls are too aggressive!" Bryce spent the next 3 days installing unnecessary VPNs and rewriting firewall rules, causing internal network slowdowns but never fixing the underlying compliance failure. The project was technically working, but it was now hermetically sealed from the outside world. Day 14. The company's largest potential client, Horizon Shipping, arrived for their final due diligence presentation. Miles, blinded by his own confidence, gave a flawless demo of Phoenix solving hypothetical global bottlenecks. Horizon's lead counsel, Mr. Davies, was quiet throughout the demonstration. Afterward, he didn't ask about algorithms, he asked about licensing continuity. "Mr. Holloway," Davies began, tapping a clean white folder, "our legal department ran a preliminary audit of the infrastructure that supports the core authentication module. We note that the commercial use license for Aegis Solutions API module is listed as expiring in 3 days, with no documented renewal or alternative architecture filed with federal regulators." Miles looked completely blank. "That's internal cleanup, Davies, irrelevant. We'll purchase the perpetual license later." Davies countered. "But the current version of the code, which we audited yesterday, is functionally dependent on that license. If it expires, the core validation fails. We cannot move forward with a $400 million investment that will have zero external functionality on day 0. Who is the current custodial officer authorized to approve this change?" Miles stammered. The team handles that. Bryce. We have Bryce." Davies smiled politely. "Our records indicate the last approved signatories are a Jessica Sharp, who was terminated, and a Lena Sharma, who has taken a position with Titan Global. We need assurance that the chain of custody and control is unbroken and that the $400 million system isn't reliant on the institutional memory of recently departed personnel." Miles's face went pale. He had fired the only two people who understood that $50,000 in paperwork was the difference between a successful launch and a catastrophic failure. The problem wasn't the code, it was the receipts. Day 17, the deadline. I was in my new office at Titan Global, the view of the city making Logicor's glass tower look small and frantic. I didn't need to check the news. I just checked the Aegis Solutions license portal, my burner account still active. The status had changed to expired. The phone rang. It was Mr. Chen. Sharma? Logicor just hit a hard stop. Horizon Shipping walked. The reason cited? Unresolved compliance custody and system continuity gaps. I looked out the window. Across town, the Logicor offices were dark, but the executive conference room was blazing with light. I imagined the scene. Miles, sweating, blaming Bryce, blaming the firewall, blaming me, the janitor, for not filing the $50,000 renewal. I hadn't deleted the code. I had just put an empty function in its way. The failure was completely non-malicious, completely avoidable, and completely Miles's fault for valuing spectacle over structure. Mr. Chen then said, "Horizon is looking for a new logistics partner. They have a $400 million problem, and they need someone who understands system continuity gaps. They asked specifically for the compliance architect with the tertiary custodial authority on Logicor's old network." I smiled into the phone. "I'm on my way, Mr. Chen. I brought my binder." My revenge was complete, not when Logicor failed, but when I was recognized for the invisible work Miles had mocked. The market didn't reward the visionary, it rewarded the person who read the fine print. And I, the data janitor, had just cleaned up a $250 million mess, not by breaking the company, but by simply letting the company break itself. The systems I had anchored were now proving my worth louder than any speech Miles could have given.